Hey, everybody. I'm Chris Metzler, one of the programmers here at SF DocFest. As you might have heard, we're celebrating our silver anniversary, our 25th anniversary of bringing documentaries from around the world to here to the Bay Area. And sometimes just like serendipity intervenes, and not only do you see a great film, but you see a great film with connections to the Bay Area and also with an alumni. And with the terrific film Human Shield you just saw, we're lucky enough to have Aaron Persley here, who actually produced a great film, Bleeding Audio, several years back. And so, welcome back, Aaron, with the new film. And if everybody can introduce themselves.
Yeah, you sort of already did my great intro, so I'll just add on to that. Hi, I'm Erin Persley. I'm the director and producer of Human Shield.
I'm Kristen Haiti. I am one of the Shields. I'm program director for Abortion Access Front, and I run my local clinic escort group.
And hey, y'all, I'm Kelsey McLean. I also am a shield in the documentary, and I founded and coordinate with the volunteer group that you'll see in the film. And I also, my full-time work is with an organization out of Alabama called Yellowhammer Fund.
Very cool. I get this question a lot from audience members sometimes. People are curious about like how do filmmakers come up with ideas for their films. And then how do you know when an idea is something that you kind of want to kind of jump into and take that leap of faith? So, Aaron, what was the catalyst for making this film?
Yeah, I'm someone who's sort of when I'm online and I'm sort of zooming or like looking at different articles, I can get sort of sucked into reading something. And so I was just randomly reading an article on the Huffington Post written by Lauren Rankin about clinic escorts. And she talked about clinic escorting as an act of compassion. She talked about it being psychological warfare. And a lot of these sort of terms that I had never really heard of. I'd watched a ton of abortion docs and sort of thought I saw everything, and realized I didn't know that much about clinic escorts. So I reached out to Lauren and I was like, hey, I just read this article you wrote. Like, I'm curious. Can I ask more questions? Essentially, I became a filmmaker just because I'm nosy and sort of curious. And so I just was like, hey, can I ask you some questions about like, what is this? Like, how did you get into it? She was really kind and sort of gave me some more information. And then she connected me with sort of one group, the Clinic Vest Project, and then they connected me with other escorts. And I started talking to Kelsey and Kristen and so many other escorts. And I just was like, wow, this is something that I hadn't seen before in a film that I thought really needed to be shown. It was sort of like a lesser known part of the ecosystem of abortion access and abortion rights. And so I essentially said, this has to be a movie. I wasn't quite sure what it was going to look like, which is why it took me about 8 years to piece it all together. I think I knew that it had to be more than a short film. I knew it had to be a feature because there was so much to it. And I wanted to be focused on the people. That was sort of the biggest part of it is there's a lot of great films about like, trap laws and, abortion bans, but I wanted this to be about the people sort of behind the vest and what it took to sort of step up in that type of volunteer work.
Yeah, most definitely. And, out of curiosity, I mean, one of those things, can't make a documentary without participants. And so, Kelsey and Kristen, I mean, you're public facing in the work that you're doing, but like when Aaron had reached out and said, hey, about making this documentary, I mean, were you at all reticent at all about kind of one is, having a camera around, two, just kind of being even more public. Yeah. So how did you kind of respond to kind of the idea of being in a documentary and how did that kind of shape the story that we see?
Well, I imagine Kelsey was probably more thoughtful than me. I can't stress enough how little I really thought about it at first. Someone I trusted was like, this person is doing this thing and would like to talk to escorts. I was like, all right, sounds good. And then for some reason she just kept talking. And then when she was asking me, I was like, yeah, all right, fine, whatever. It didn't really occur to me, I guess. And then she just showed up with a camera and then, oh, it's real. All right, we're doing this.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest hesitations were around like impact to the communities we serve, patients. I never want my work or the work I do to be someone else's, like a broadcast someone else's like worst day, right? So there were some concerns around that, but I think speaking with Erin and the way that she seemed very open and understanding to these concerns and willing to like work through that, it made it easy. And for me personally, I'm someone who's always been pretty public and vocal and open about having had an abortion and my work at the clinic. And so saying yes to this kind of additional public exposure was easy, especially because I've experienced a lot of demonization in the process of this work. And I think it's harder to demonize people when you get a look into their lives. It's something I've experienced with the protesters at our clinic. We sometimes keep a close eye on them. And when I learn something cool about them, like they like snakes or, they enjoy a nice hike in nature and taking a picture of a beautiful sunset, it makes it harder to not like them. So I'm hopeful seeing me in my element makes it harder for them to do gross things and harass and abuse people. But, wishful thinking.
We're
Yeah,
hopeful people by nature.
that's a beautiful statement. I think it's a cool. One of the things so with this being something that isn't super well known, makes the film kind of fascinating because that sense of watching a documentary and discovery. But kind of flipping on the side, why do you think this is something that just? Why do you think we don't talk about these things, I guess, in such a kind of greater ways? Because, you would just think, especially in the world we live in, this sort of thing would be, disseminated much more. So, like, what are some of the challenges, that are there, and why do you think this kind of goes under the radar of so many people?
I'm going to start, but I know that Kelsey and Kristen probably have a lot more to add to this. I think part of it is abortion is sort of seen as taboo. Even again, there's so many documentaries that talk about different aspects of it, but there's still so much that's really unknown from the general public. And I think that's by design to make it feel secretive and sort of less information, misinformation, I think is part of the plan of the anti-abortion movement. So I think that's part of it. Um, I also feel like because abortion clinics tend to be in spaces that you don't generally see in your everyday unless you drive by it, right? So the clinic in that Kristen escorts out in Toledo is on a main street, but if you don't go to that neighborhood, you can easily avoid it. For Kelsey's clinic, it's in a cul-de-sac that you have to actually go into to see, so you can easily avoid it if you don't. So I think if you're not forced into this and seeing what's happening and this type of visibility, it's easy to sort of ignore. And I think
Mm.
we as a community love to sort of put our heads in the sand and ignore what we don't need to focus on. So I think that's sort of how I sort of saw a lot of the unknown of it. But I'm curious from both of them in terms of being in the movement, why they think escorts are maybe lesser spoken about.
I think first and foremost, it's really much what you just said, the hidden nature of abortion. We've really othered abortion. We assume it happens to people that aren't us, people that aren't our loved ones. It's this mysterious third category of a human being that we know exists, but we have no connections with. And that's because no one talks about their abortion experiences. So, abortion being othered, the fact that it is often hidden at these clinics, both for patient privacy and also probably the affordability of a clinic, right? Much cheaper to find a clinic off the beaten path versus on the main drag. And then I think there's the reality that a lot of our work, like we are not broadcasting our work in the way other people typically broadcast their volunteerism. We aren't able to film a testimonial with a patient where they talk about the huge impact that our work had on them because our impact is only in maybe 5 seconds, 15 seconds, a minute, 2, 3. And then they move on with their lives. And we're just this small, tiny part of a day that may or may not have been transformative for them, or maybe it's something they're just quickly trying to get behind them because they just need to get back to life as normal. So I think all of that combined has made the work really invisible. One thing I also have experienced heavily when we're training new people is the shock they come away from that first shift on site with. Like they truly, even people who find out about us and want to be involved, cannot believe what they've witnessed and what is happening in their own community. And they've been kind of sleeping on for however long it's taken them to come out for that first shift.
Mm.
And I would literally just co-sign everything they said. And just a smaller thing, I think a lot of us also have that personal tendency of we have no interest in centering ourselves and making this about ourselves, which is something that is hard to fight with when you're trying to get exposure for things and people.
Cool. And it's kind of kind of looking at things through kind of a filmmaking lens, given the kind of unique circumstances of the story, Aaron, like how did that kind of shape the way that you wanted to kind of capture the film aesthetically or like the process of filming?
Yeah, I mean, I think Kelsey sort of mentioned this a little bit earlier. Essentially, we knew that we wanted to be at the clinic, and we needed to film for several shifts over several years. We didn't want to just come out one day and then just show one day in the life of an escort because as they, constantly talk about escorting, is never the same, two shifts in a row. So it wouldn't make sense for me just to come out once and then say, okay, I've captured the entire, experience. So we took a long time to come out, different seasons, different years. So that was part of it is the duration of how long we wanted to film to really show the progression. I think also because we didn't want it to harm anyone's experience, we didn't want to, and we wanted to make sure that we weren't causing more chaos. As soon as you bring a camera out, people do want to perform. I mean, even as much as we tried to minimize our presence, it was myself and a cinematographer, and it was essentially the same cinematographer almost every single time in each location. I didn't want to, I would have loved to have like a boom mic and like better audio. There's tons of times for both Kristen and Kelsey were like down the block, and I had a wireless lavalier that would cut out because I didn't have enough range. But essentially, if I had a crazy, a boom mic, it would be so much more obvious. And we wanted to sort of be in the background and just sort of capture what's happening. So I think we were definitely moving around the space a lot. I was constantly sort of behind the DP, sort of looking around and sort of be as small as possible. So I think the actual filming was very grassroots and very low key and a little bit of guerrilla style. There's a couple shots in the film where we're like behind fences because that's all essentially we wanted to sort of just show what was happening without sort of bringing that like here perform for us. So I think that's part of it. And then I think the other part is we knew because we were going to film for a long time that things were going to change. Many of the escorts had told us way before Roe fell that Roe was going to fall. And so we knew we needed to film afterwards because you can't just show, we didn't want to just show, all these amazing volunteers working and then Roe's overturned and then like, okay, now we're done because the work is continuing. It's actually getting harder. And so we knew we needed to sort of focus on that as well. I think the big thing around figuring out how to film this sort of movement is we knew we also need to show multiple locations. Every location is different. Every clinic escort shift is different. It just took so many variables. So I think we were really leaning into the idea of it being verite, so you could just sort of experience what's happening without sort of it being in your face, but also having to show multiple examples, multiple areas to try to give a depth. I mean, even then, I know that like I'm sure there's going to be some clinic escorts or other people who watch the film, but like, what about what happens in like this clinic or this place? If we could have made like a 10-hour show, series of clinic escort films, that would have been great. But at some point, Kelsey and Kristen were like, please stop filming me and please release this movie. So I had to stop at some point. So yeah, that's part of it.
And as we kind of wrap up here, this isn't the case for every film, right? But like, there is kind of a bit of and in addition to kind of adding to discussion, there's a little bit of a kind of a call to action. And so, in making the film, Aaron, and in sharing your stories, Kelsey and Kirsten, like what would, for those of us that watch the film and just say, hey, look, what can we do? What would you kind of encourage or want people in the audience to kind of consider or reflect upon, as lights come up after the movie?
Yeah, I'll give my spin and then I'm definitely going to have them add to it. I made this film. I spent 8+ years of my life sweating through through the edit process and everything else because I believe that documentaries can actually impact and cause real, create real change. And so I would love for people to watch this film. I think on the very like minimum, create some visibility for this work. So like what's actually happening, a little bit of a reality check of like, I know that there's like fires all around us and we can't keep up with all the things that are happening, but I think it's important to like not lose sight that even though Roe was overturned in 2022, what's happening now is still really prevalent and is still happening. I mean, there just was a court case that I'm sure Kelsey and Kristen can talk to that just happened this week. That's there's things that are happening at this particular moment. So I think that's part of it is to stay engaged and stay motivated. I know that they both of them can talk about donating to your local abortion fund and how much abortion funds really play into role. I think not everyone is expected to become a clinic escort volunteer, but there are ways that you can help support these types of organizations, whether with your money or your time. And so I think I just want to motivate people to think about what in small way they can actually find define their connection to this movement. And I guess the last thing is just talking about abortion more openly, right? The idea of abortion stigma is a huge thing. We in the film really wanted to show people talking about their experience in different ways and just making this less of a taboo topic, that it can be every day. We could discuss it as healthcare, like everything else. So I think those are the big things I would love for people to be excited about and be motivated, for sure.
I think Aaron nailed all of that. Absolutely. And really finding the places in your own community that are doing this work. And again, it doesn't have to be escorting, any really local mutual aid, which is what clinic escorting and clinic defending really is. It's mutual aid. We are showing up for our community to make a safer space. And that's where all of the best organizing happens. You can make care packages for patients. You could find your local food not bombs. There's a lot of things. So really just everything Aaron said, and then find these in your community and help build them up to find more people and bring them in.
I think one extra thing that people can do, and I think it's something that this film really highlights, is like lean into the discomfort you have, lean into the unfamiliar. I think we are in a moment where there are a lot of really heartbreaking tragedies happening to the people all around us, and there's not a documentary telling their stories. And I think people will walk away from this feeling like, okay, like abortion is more humanized, and like clearly everyone involved in this process is like deep care and consideration, and is not like a person who hates babies or, is, against the birth rate or whatever weird thing that might keep you
We
from.
love babies, actually.
Yeah. There's lots of baby loving happening in this film, lots of, sweet moments with folks' children, and showing the way that family is often built around abortion, which is something that we just don't talk about or normalize. So I think just take this as like a moment to like remember that there are real people behind these things that get politicized, and that taking action is really important. Like it's so easy to sit at home and be concerned and be upset and be like, well, what can I do? Take a next step. Use this as a moment, this humanizing moment, to take a next step, because there's definitely similar stories behind so many people you care about.
Very cool. Well, thanks again for both making the film, but also kind of sharing your stories. Really appreciate it. And thanks again for being part of SF Doc Fest.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
having us.
Thank you.